a review of the Lantern Moon interchangeable knitting needles. Hi everyone, Norman here. Today I want to take a very close look at this set of Lantern Moon knitting needles. These needles are produced from pure ebony, are very durable, very warm to the touch, but also a little bit more on the pricier side. So let's find out together if these needles are worth it or maybe not. So this here is the set, and this is an unsponsored review. Just like all my other knitting needle reviews here on my channel, I really feel this is important because as soon as you get sponsored, as soon as there is a compensation, you never can share your honest opinion, because I mean, who would cut off their main money supply? So this is an unsponsored review. However, this here was a gift, mainly because 2 years ago I wanted to buy the Lantern Moon needles to test them for you. That's when I found this beautiful leather pouch with these, well, Lantern Moon needles inside, or so I thought. However, these here are fake and they are horrible to knit with. So whenever you make an expensive purchase, always buy from a trusted vendor, from the local yarn shop, from someone you know very well, because fakes are around. Anyway, that's when I reached out to KnitPro and asked, well, where can I actually buy the real deal? And it turned out back then they weren't available here in Austria, and that's how I received this sample here. Now, just in case you are confused, why did I say KnitPro now? Well, Lantern Moon has been acquired by KnitPro a couple of years ago, and now these needles are produced in the very same factory as all their other needles in India. And just in case you are still confused, KnitPro was formerly known as Knitter's Pride in the US, but as of this year they are called KnitPro, and actually they have been known as KnitPro in Europe and the rest of the world for the past 2 decades. It was only in the US they were called Knitter's Pride, but no longer. Anyway, let's take a look inside. With that out of the way, let's take a look at the pouch and what's inside. So the exterior here, this is Indian khadi silk, possibly hand-woven, looks very rustic, very charming, and then here a machine embroidery on top. A zipper will access the interior, and then here you are greeted by this lustrous deep blue fabric. I don't know what it is, silk, cotton, maybe a blend or so. Actually looks very refined and very luxurious. Here on the right side you will have the different slots for the different needles. As you can see, 10 all together. And then here there is a pouch for the cables. This pouch here is empty for, I don't know, some scissors or whatever other notions you need. And then here are further accessories. So let's go through all of these items one by one. So, as I just said, each set, or rather this set here, comes with altogether 10 needles. It starts at US size 2.5 or 3 millimeters, all the way up to US size 11 or 8 millimeters. Each pair of interchangeable needle tips here sits in its own slot here, and these flaps here are possibly there to prevent them from falling out. Now I wish there was some Velcro here or a little button, because if you shake it out like this, the needles will, especially here, these larger needles will come flying regardless. So I think this could be improved, but of course you could also, add a little Velcro or button here. You can do this yourself. I also wish there would be the actual needle size here would be stitched into these various different slots, or maybe just a little sticker or so, because that makes accessing the right needle size so much easier and faster. However, I will say that the needle size is printed on the stalks quite boldly. so it's reasonably easy to access these needles. So up in here is the pouch for the cables, and as you can see there are 6 cables altogether. There is a little tag here that says Lantern Moon handcrafted, but of course this is the only bit. There is no offensive logo here on the outside. I really appreciate this. Here I would have to say that this slot here for the cables, well, it's kind of ambitious because it means you always have to coil your cables like that, otherwise they won't fit and you won't be able to, you know, cram them inside. So I wish this was actually like there was a little zipper, Velcro or so, but you know, this is of course criticizing on a very high level. Altogether, as you can see, 6 cables in this set, in this large set, and this is actually quite noteworthy. So, for example, you get 2 cables here that are 60 centimeters or 24 inches long. Now, in a lot of other sets, you also get 2 cables, but here this is special because one, and we'll take a look at this in closer detail later on in this video, but one of this is fixed and the other is a swivel cable where you can rotate this end bit here freely. And of course it's the same for these cables, so you get 2 cables that are 100 centimeters or 40 inches long, and again one is a swivel cable, one isn't, and then 2 cables each 80 centimeters or 32 inches. And I think I would say other needle manufacturers take note, because some people really prefer swivel cables, others don't, but here you get both, and I feel this is well, marks a truly interchangeable needle set where you really can find the perfect cable for the perfect project. So always a perfect match. So this is nice. Before we take a very close look at the tips and the cables here, let's check out the other accessories. So here you get 2 cable keys, and I really need to highlight this because these are very, very well done. So you can use these here to attach the interchangeable tips here to your cable. And not only are they very, very well crafted, because remember, a lot of other manufacturers just provide these very, very cheap and flimsy T-pins here, but I also feel that, you know, when you have an interchangeable needle tip, it's very important to screw things tight, otherwise things will come undone. And here you really have a very nice leverage. I mean, they actually look very, very nice as well, but you have very, very nice and very nice leverage to screw things tight, and you get 2 of these here. Normally, I always complain that the sets always only come with 2 of these pins, but of course here in this case here, these get easily lost here. These are actually very nice, and I can understand why there are only 2 of them. Then let's dig around. You also get 4 of these cable stoppers, so you can use these here to attach them to the other end of the cable, and then your stitches won't fall off. You can use this whenever you need to put stitches on hold, or you have one of these unfinished objects and you need the tips for a different project, then you can use these here to put stitches on hold. You get 4 all together. These are very, very well crafted. They look very nice, so very, very lovely. I really have to say that. And then you also get altogether, I have 5 here, 5 little stitch markers. I think they look fun, these little tassels here. So I don't know if I would actually use them, but I rather prefer those little clippy markers. But they actually look very, very fun and nice here with these silk tassels or whatever it is. So I really like that, and there are 5 of those. Well, let's take a look at the tips next. Let's focus on the most important factor here first. So the actual interchangeable needle tips. As you can see, these stalks and the taper are made from a very dark wood here. And then these connector bits, these end bits here, this is golden, possibly some golden brass. The needle size, as you can see, is printed on the stalks in a very nice, big and bold font. Even if I take, one of these smaller needle sizes here, it's still very big and bold, and I really have to highlight this because often a lot of manufacturers print these needle sizes on the stocks, but it's so tiny and so hard to see that you need, I don't know, a magnification lens or so. And I mean, let's be honest, a lot of knitters are a little bit on the older side, maybe in the second half of their life, where the eyes aren't perfect anymore, so having this in a very big bold font is very nice. I mean, I'm not sure if I actually need the Lantern Moon logo here on the actual stalk as well. I feel that is a bit distracting, but there is that. And if you take a very close look, you can see that the needle size is etched into the end bit as well. So I feel this is actually a very nice detail, because these are wooden needles, so this is printed on. Ultimately, over time, this will vanish. I mean, they could etch it into the wood, but then this would be very distracting while you knit, and it might catch the yarn or whatever. So even if this here will rub off over time, you still have the needle size here. It's very difficult to see, but it's still there. So this is redundant. I really like this bit. So here is a close-up look at those beautiful wooden needles. Look how dark, deep and silky smooth that wood is. Very warm to the touch. Almost creamy. Very nice. The needles are also very durable. So if I wanted to, well, try to scratch this here with my fingernail, you see nothing happens. And even if so here, this is a scissor, and this is something like, don't do this at home. See? So I'm using the edge here. Nothing happens. Do the same with bamboo, and of course you will have permanent scratch marks. So this is very durable. Also, if you compare here, this is the 3mm needle. Of course, here this is slightly flexible, and this is one of the reasons, of course, why these needles and hardwood needles in general shouldn't be produced under 3mm, because otherwise they will just be too flexible. That's the nature of any wooden needle. But here, all the other sizes, they are just so durable. Now this here is ebony, and just by comparison here, so here these are the Chaogu 40 needles. And the Chaogu 40 needles, they are African blackwood. And I hope you can see, so these are a little bit more on the grayish side. And if I turn things around, you might be able to see like the grain of the wood, like the remnants, like little stripes here, the remnants of the earrings. Whereas this is pitch black, pure ebony. And whenever one talks about ebony, you also need to talk about, well, fakes. So I cut these needles here apart to check whether this isn't actually ebony and maybe it was dyed. But as you can see, it's deep black through and through. And here is another test. So this is a little bowl of water, and I'm just gonna put it in
and see it sinks to the bottom. This is another test to check whether if you are, you know, dealing with dyed wood or something like that, or true ebony. Ebony woods are also always so dense that they sink to the bottom. These needles are said to be handcrafted, so let's take a look at how well they are crafted. So these here are 8mm needles, so let's take a look. So 8.1 seems reasonably enough. These are 5mm needles, so let's take a look. 4 point, well, I mean, you do have to notice that these are wooden needles and it's almost impossible to polish them to the exact same size. So compare that those are the CHAOGU Forte needles. This is also 5mm, so here we are a little bit under. Again, these are the Lantern Moon needles. So I would say this is well within the parameters. But from my measurements, I found out that these are typically always, so the arrow is to the upper side, while here with the CHAOGU Forte needles, the arrow is typically to the lower side. So the CHAOGU Forte needles are always a little bit smaller than what is printed on the needles, and these are a tiny little bit of a fraction wider. So this is 3.5mm than what's printed on the needles. Let's focus on these tips here next. So as you can see, these tips here are not super sharp. Of course, that is within expectations, because I mean, if you would put this into a pencil sharpener or so, the tips would just break off. That's the nature of wooden needles. These tips here are somewhat blunt. So here by comparison, on the left, these are the CHAOGU Forte needles. And as you can see, these tips, of course, they are metal tips, are quite a bit sharper than, but not actually all that much. I mean, you can definitely see that this tip here is quite a bit sharper, but it's not like these here were totally blunt. So here is another comparison. So here on the left side, those are the KnitPro Dreams hardwood needles, and they are, as you can see, the tips are identical. This is of course no big surprise because Lantern Moon is owned by KnitPro, so it is within expectations that the tips are just as sharp or blunt, depending on how you want to look at it. However, if you own any hardwood needles by KnitPro, formerly known as Knitter's Pride in the US, then you might check, or this is a good way to compare these tips, because these tips here are identical. You can also see that the taper is just as long. Another major player on the market when it comes to hardwood needles is Lykke. Here, so these are the Lykke Umber needles, also 4mm in this case, and you can see that the tips are of the Lykke maybe a fraction sharper. However, you can hopefully also see that the taper is a tiny little bit shorter. So where are some needles? So here, this is where the taper of the Lykke Umber needles ends, and here, this is where the taper of the Lantern Moon needles. And so these are maybe, I don't know, maybe a tiny little bit sharper, but the taper is shorter. And just because I think these comparisons really matter when it comes to forming an informed buying decision. So here, these are the Lantern Moon tips. These here are the KnitPro Mindless tips. Here, this is CHAOGU, and these super sharp stiletto tips is the higher sharp tips. Just to give you a very good impression how much, well, blunter, if you want to call it that, how much blunter these tips are and the length of the taper. Here also rather on the shorter side. Of course, this can be a pro or a con. Now, very important, of course, we also need to focus here on this end here, on the other end of the needle, and these transitions. So as you can see, it has a very smooth profile with a very nice gradual decrease in diameter. And here, this doesn't really catch my fingernail, not at all. Maybe in this direction, a tiny little fraction, but as you can see, this is as smooth and well crafted as it gets. Here, this transition, this is something I do notice. So here, my fingernail catches slightly, but I would say not in a horrible way. Here is another view of the same connection. So here you can see how very smooth this is. Here I think you can see the slight little step here, but I wouldn't say it's horrible or so. It's just a little bit noticeable. And then of course here, this is also very nice. But as usual, feeling is one thing, trying it out is better. So here, this is a loop of yarn. So here in this direction, this is the non-swivel cable here. In this direction, so here, this definitely catches the yarn slightly. These things here, there is another step here, there isn't. So here, see, there is a slight step. Here, this bit is a little bit larger. Of course, I also want to knit a couple of stitches with it, so they are, I would say, very warm and very exceptionally light here in my hands. The tips are, as I just said, a little bit more on the blunter side. They don't feel sticky at all or so, rather smooth, and but there is, well, you don't notice the grain of the wood. However, there is, compared to, say, metal needles, I definitely feel there is a difference. So they feel, well, they have quite a little bit more grip. And just let's slide here these needles, these stitches here on the needles. As you can see, I mean, my single thread kind of caught. But other than that, you know, this is pretty smooth. So actually a very nice connection, and I would feel nothing. So even, yeah, well, I mean, if at one point, if this is a little bit too bent, then this is, but otherwise, you know, I would say this is actually quite nice. I also quickly attached the swivel cable, so the cable here that can rotate freely in its socket here, to see if there is a difference. So, but as you can see, things glide across the cable and all the connectors quite effortlessly. Again, you notice that there is quite a bit of resistance, but of course that is one of the pros of hardwood needles, that there is more resistance, that the stitches don't fall or slip off the needles as easily, because I know a lot of people don't really like it if the needles are too slippery or they feel cold, and these are neither slippery nor cold. Now I will say that of course the tips are black. This means they might offer a nice contrast for bright yarns, but the darker your yarns are and the darker the environment is where you are knitting, the more difficult it will be to, well, you know, differentiate between needles and tips and so on. So I think this is another thing I have to mention here, is that that of course dark needles have also their cons. When you you like knitting with brown or deep dark tones, then and your eyes aren't the best anymore, and you don't like knit in bright sunlight all the time, then this of course is something you might notice. But another thing I really like, so as there is no real noise as you click, so there's no clickety clack sound, and they hear these tips here, they glide across these tips very effortlessly. You don't notice any resistance or so that bit is also very nice. So just to reinforce this, these needles are super silent. So that is of course another advantage of wooden needles. They are quite a little bit less noisy than stainless steel needles, and for some people this is important. Next, what can I tell you about the cables? So as you can see, these are stainless steel cables. So you can see the wire here underneath, but they're coated, so they're smooth on the outside. So there is a wire core, and outside there's some, well, plastic, whatever, on the outside. And again, one of the cables, you get a pair of each. So one has the swivel connector, and this here won't budge, but this here has the swivel connector. So depending on your project, sometimes you have to turn around your project a lot, sometimes you don't. And depending on your project, you can pick which, or your preferences, of course, you can pick which cable you wanna pick. Of course, when one talks about wire cables, you absolutely need to compare them with the other major player on the market, ChiaoGoo. So here on the left, those are the ChiaoGoo cables, and here those are the Lantern Moon cables. So as you can see, the Lantern Moon cables here are a little bit thinner than the ChiaoGoo cable, but only a little bit. And since these cables are a little bit thinner, they are also a little bit more flexible than the ChiaoGoo cables. I wouldn't say it's, a major difference, but still, if you are familiar with the ChiaoGoo cables, then these are, well, a fraction, a little bit more flexible, but I would say neither would be my first choice for traveling magic loop. However, maybe if you prefer knitting socks 2 at a time, these can both actually, but these Lantern Moon cables can be quite lovely. The advantage of these cables, of course, is obvious. So if you use them, they never really curl. I will say that a little bit of the curl, as you can see, remains. So if you compare that to ChiaoGoo, so here I have the same pack. So ChiaoGoo kind of uncurls a little bit better than these Lantern Moon cables, which seem to retain a little bit. Now I would say it's nothing major, but there is a difference, and I really need to point these small differences out here. Yet I would still maintain that if you are someone who doesn't like curling cables, constantly getting twisted up and in your way, then these here are certainly lovely, especially since they are swivel cables. However, sorry, in terms of twisting, I would say the ChiaoGoo cables are actually a tiny little bit better. They are also a little bit wider, at least the medium-sized cables, and that can also be a pro. Here at the end, I want to highlight one important bit. So here, these are the Lantern Moon tips and the Lantern Moon cables. However, I can use the very same cables and attach, these are the Lykke cupra needles and attach them to the same cables. These, for example, are the KnitPro Nova needles, and I can use the same cables, or I can use the Lantern Moon tips and attach. These are the Lykke swivel cables and plastic here. This is plastic, and attach them, or use the KnitPro. These are the KnitPro Mindful collection cables and attach these, or here these are the original KnitPro Nova, the very old Nova cables from, I don't know, 2 decades ago, and they still work and you can still attach them to these needles. So if you own some KnitPro or some old Knitter's Pride products or some Lykke products or drops or knit picks, those will be all interchangeable, and you can use all your existing accessories, cables and so on, and combine them with these new Mindful collection needles.
So we are here back in my studio for my final verdict. So I just checked Amazon.com, and currently this set here, those are the 5-inch tips. They are also available as 4-inch. This set here costs around $140 on a good day. That is actually quite the high price considering it's only 10 needles. Remember, a lot of other sets come with 12 or 13 tips. This is just 10 tips. So it's actually per tip or per needle, it's actually the same price range as, say, ChiaoGoo. And of course, ChiaoGoo is currently the most expensive standard set available on the market. Then again, you really have to consider this is ebony, and ebony is quite a little bit more expensive than stainless steel. Still, is it actually worth it? Well, I personally would say that this set here is very, very well designed. So the fact that you get 6 cables in all the right lengths, and 3 of them are swivel cables and 3 of them are not standard fixed cables, I think that is great, because a lot of other sets you have to make a choice. Do I want something with swivel cables or fixed? Here you actually don't need to make that choice. I think that is just awesome. Also, I mean, all these accessories like these needle cable keys or the needle stoppers, they are very well crafted, and you know, a lot of other sets and a lot of other manufacturers include these cheap, flimsy plastic trinkets I never end up using, and actually kind of, well, not throwing away but giving away and not using, where they gather dust. And here I feel what has been added really is well crafted, and those are little accessories I really see myself using. However, there is only that. So there are no, you know, scissors, needle gauges or whatever added. It's just that. And the best bit, none of it is wrapped in extra plastic bags. Because often you buy a set and then all the stitch markers are in one plastic bag. And all the accessories and all the extenders, they're all in a separate plastic bag. And sometimes these plastic bags are wrapped in another plastic bag. And I personally feel, I mean, you have a perfectly reasonable pouch with perfectly reasonable slots and sockets inside, so you don't need any extra plastic. And I wish a lot of, especially the Chinese manufacturers, would follow suit. So I'm talking about ChiaoGoo and Haya. They often use so much plastic, and I always ask myself why. I mean, it's a perfectly fine pouch. You don't need that plastic, especially as knitting is often all about those sustainable choices. Now, the needles here themselves are very durable, very warm and pleasant to the touch, and they offer that little bit of extra resistance without being unpleasantly rough. So sometimes when I knit with bamboo or so, you feel the grain of the wood, and I feel it's a little bit irritating in here. None of that, very, very smooth, and you really can't really scratch them either. Now, the tips are also reasonable sharp, but obviously not the sharpest as I've shown. So perfect for simpler projects in stockinette stitch, seed stitch, ribbing, things like that, but maybe not for a lace pattern. And these tips are also perfect for all those people who push the needle tips a lot and don't want their fingertips to get hurt. Also very, very nice for people Like if you have problems with your wrists or so and you don't like cold materials on your hands like stainless steel, copper, whatever, then this here can also be very great. I also like the size range that is included in these larger sets. So especially on the lower end, so you have 3 millimeters, 3.25, 3.5, 3.7. 4 millimeters, 4.5 and 5 millimeter needles, and there is no weird gap because often it's like you buy these sets but there's either just 3 millimeters or 3.25 millimeters included, and then you read a pattern from America or Europe and it asks for these 3 millimeter needles, but your set only comes with 3.25 millimeters, and then you're kind of screwed, and here you don't have these weird gaps. So I think that is a very nice size range. Of course, it stops at 8 millimeters. However, you can buy tips up to 13 millimeters separately. It also has to be mentioned that, like, unlike for say Chagu or Haya, all the cables work for all tips, so you don't need two different cable sizes, one for the smaller needles and one for the bigger needles, and I always really appreciate, because I always feel, what's the point in having an interchangeable needle set when the cables aren't actually interchangeable? So there is none of that here. Of course, the downside is that the smallest tip are those 3 millimeter needles. So there are no 2 millimeter or 2.5 millimeter needles. However, I feel, with a stainless steel set or so, I feel this is actually not so nice. But with hardwood, I mean, producing 2.5 millimeter or 2 millimeter hardwood needles, I feel that it's just being dishonest with the customer, because they will always break. Even if this is hardwood, there are limits to the durability. So the fact that the 3 millimeters is the lowest they go, I feel, that is well within the expectations of hardwood needles. The elephant in the room is, of course, the ebony. So I am no woodworking pro. I cut these, I looked at it under a magnification lens, and my tests indicate that this is actually real ebony, unlike so many other products on the market that say they are ebony, but they are basically painted boxwood. Though I do have to say, the utter lack of visible grain and the very uniform color, that's certainly something we need to talk about. The official Lantern Moon website says it's Indian ebony and I need to read this, I quote, is legally sourced from government authorized wood stockyards and is being sold as per the provisions of local laws and international treaties. Because, that's the other side of the coin. Yes, ebony is beautiful, yes, it is very durable, but these severe trade restrictions around the globe are there for a reason, because most ebony tree species are actually critically endangered, and you have to decide for yourself if you want to be part of that or not. It's legally sourced, and if it wasn't, I am fairly reasonably sure that they wouldn't be able to export it to the EU or the US in the first place. Still, it's certainly a debate you have to have with yourself, because if there is legal demand and a very high price, there almost always is illegal activity, especially at the record prices, and considering that ebony comes from Sri Lanka, from South India, from Cameroon and other countries where that are actually very poor, and the timber of a single tree could feed a family of 6 for a whole year. All in all, I would say these Lantern Moon needles, this set here is perfect for everyone that enjoys wooden needles. So as far as wooden needles are concerned, I would actually go as far as saying that these here could be the best currently on the market. The cables are lovely, the joints smooth, especially with the swivel cables. Those can always be a little bit of an issue. They are very light, they are very pleasant and warm in the hand, and on top of that, These needles are interchangeable with all other KnitPro products on the market. So if you own any like aluminium, stainless steel coated metal needles from KnitPro or Knitter's Pride, and also Lykke, by the way, all those accessories will be interchangeable with this set. And I feel that's the hallmark of any interchangeable knitting needle set, that you have so many choices, and with these you can really have a lot of choices. For me personally, I have to say that the needles are a little bit too slow for me and the tips a little bit too blunt. I really like the way they look. I mean, I love the blue, I love the gold, I love the black, all these colors. Those are all some of my favorite colors, but they are just a little bit too slow for me, and for, you know, the tips a little bit too blunt for the kind of patterns I typically knit. But, you know, preferences differ, and that's why I'm recording these videos. Just because I don't use some knitting needles or dislike some knitting needles doesn't mean that they could not be perfect for you, or vice versa. Anyway, that was my review of the Lantern Moon interchangeable knitting needles. Comment below if you still have any questions. And as always, happy knitting and enjoy the rest of your day. And and like and subscribe.